Hello, welcome to Freeze Drying Alberta. My name is Tina, and if you are coming and picking up a freeze dryer or accessories at my family's business, I will often be the one helping you, and I'm going to take you through a walkthrough of what it looks like to set up your freeze dryer once you get it home. So some things to consider when you're first setting it up is where you're going to be putting your freeze dryer. And the freeze dryer will need to be able to be ventilated around the sides of it. So just making sure you don't have it in too tight or enclosed of a space when you're setting it up, as well as the temperature. Both, it needs to be above freezing and not really too much above 30 degrees Celsius as far as optimal freeze drying for what you're using here. So once you have the location and you have it in place, then we'll get to the setup. So first of all, you want to make sure that your trays in here are facing the proper direction. So oftentimes when they're shipped, they'll end up being set in here any which way. And the proper way for it to be set in here is for it, the orange heat pads will be on the underside of the shelves. And if you're ever needing to get in here and access or clean more, you can take this door gasket off and the trays will come out and unclip from the freeze dryer, as well as for easy cleaning and maintenance that way. When you're closing your freeze dryer, it does have a double spin, so you want to make sure that it's fully closed and sealed before you end up starting anything. And when you're transporting, another thing to keep in mind is the door is not strong enough to hold the weight of the freeze dryer. So you want to make sure you're grabbing underneath the freeze dryer and not moving it by the door. So now as far as other setups for the freeze dryer, we'll come to the pump here first. So we have our vacuum pump hose that will attach our pump to the freeze dryer. And this doesn't matter which end you use on either side. There will be a black O-ring in the end of both of these sides. And then this just screws directly onto the freeze dryer as well as onto your pump. So you'll get that fully inserted on that side and then also on the top of your pump here as well. And in each of the boxes with your pump, it will come with a starter set of oil. So you'll remove your demister portion here. This demister also has a black O-ring on here that you want to make sure remains on your demister. And then you can just pour the oil into your pump, but it will be slightly delayed when you pour it before you'll see it in the front portion of your guide as far as where you want it to be filled. And you want the oil to come just above the halfway point in between the minimum and maximum lines there as well. And so once you get that oil in, then you can re-screw on your demister. And then there are a couple other switches here that you're going to want to make sure are in the right location. So on the top, and it does come with a little tag here that gives you a little reminder for the gas ballast. The gas ballast needs to be in the open position. So the markings on here are an O for open and a C for closed. So always in open position when you are running your freeze dryer. And then you do have your plug in here. And this one is going to plug into the back of your freeze dryer. And that's important to make sure that it's into the freeze dryer and not into the wall. So plug that one in here and have that ready. So once you've run 20-25 batches through your freeze dryer, you will need to change the oil. So you'll just turn this valve here on the front, just loosen it a little bit and then allow the oil to drain through, and it will drain through underneath the bottom. So let it drain into the oil filter that comes with the setup of the accessory pack that you have as well. And if you're ever moving your pump or transporting it, it is always good to make sure that your oil is fully drained out of there. So you want to make sure you're not tipping your pump with oil in it, but once it is mostly drained, you can tilt it up then to just get the last bit of the oil drained out of your pump. There is an on switch here just by the plug insert, and you have to make sure that is on the on position before you're running your freeze dryer as well. An additional accessory you might want to consider for the setup of your freeze dryer is to get a pressure release valve. This is handy, and it just attaches onto the side of your freeze dryer. So you just unattach this vacuum pump hose, attach your pressure release valve to the freeze dryer, and then attach your hose back to the bottom of your pressure release valve. So the benefit of having a pressure release valve is that you can release the pressure from this valve first before releasing it on the additional side, and this will then prevent, if you happen to have some water left in your bucket from draining previously, you always need to make sure that you're emptying that usually, because if you have not emptied it and you've finished the process and you release that valve, it will suction the air back in to release the pressure in your freeze dryer. And if there's water in there, it will also suction the water up with it as well. So when you have this one on here and you release this one first to allow the pressure out of this, then you don't have to worry whether there's water or not in the bucket on the other side. And then once your food is finished and you've been able to check it and you're ready to do the defrosting process of your freeze dryer, then you will need to make sure that you release the valve on the other side as well so that the water can drain out of that side. Then other setups here is we have our drain hose extension. And that just attaches to this end of the freeze dryer. And oftentimes these hoses will be just tucked inside the freeze dryer just for easier transportation. So you need to remove that out. And these hoses will just slide on to that hole. And then you will have your valve here as well, that when you are running your freeze dryer, you always want to make sure that it is in a closed position. So it will just be where it will be crossing over the hose there. And then at the end of the cycle, to release the pressure in the freeze dryer before you can open the door. And the freeze dryer will talk you through that too, as far as on the screen. It will tell you when to make sure this is closed, when to make sure it's open. So it's really easy and simple that way. But before you can open it to check your food and to pull it out, then you will need to then open that again to release the pressure inside the freeze dryer. Once you have finished a cycle on your freeze dryer, then it will defrost and you'll have moisture that will be coming through on your through your drain hose here as well. So another thing is nice to make sure that your freeze dryer is elevated so you can put a bucket underneath that will catch the water that is draining out of your freeze dryer. And once you have that all set up, then you can take your last cords here, and this one will attach directly to your freeze dryer to the wall as far as for plugging it in. So that again, it will be attached at the back. Once you have all of your hookups in place, then you'll just also need to switch the on switch on at the back to make sure that then everything is ready to go at that point. Once you have all of your setups finished off here, then the first thing you're going to do with your freeze dryer, you're going to want to make sure that it is sitting for 24 hours before you run your first batch, just for the refrigerant, to make sure that is all settled properly. And then your freeze dryer, you'll have your screen where it will allow you to select to start your batch, and that usually gives you 15 minutes where the freeze dryer is getting ready before you're going to insert your first batch. So you're going to have your drain valve closed, and your freeze dryer can be closed at that point as the freeze dryer is getting ready. And then your first item that you're going to put on is just slices of bread on each tray that you're going to insert. And that just helps if there's any factory smell that is left in your freeze dryer, or just to make sure that everything is hooked up and proper so that you don't end up with setting in a bunch of meat or fruit or something like that, that you realize that your freeze dryer is not hooked up properly and end up wasting your batch. So that just helps you just as a test to make sure everything is functioning correctly throughout the whole every tray of the freeze dryer and to get started. Once you have finished the first batch, then you can choose whatever is the next item of choice for inserting into the freeze dryer. And if you want to make it go a little bit quicker for the time in your freeze dryer, you can also pre-freeze your trays with your food on it, and then it will take less time in the freeze dryer as well. So it's a pretty easy setup, and oftentimes you'll get different cues on your display panel as well, as to make sure what's the next step that you're needing to do once you're loading your food and your trays into the freeze dryer.